You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Racial profiling is not a new issue. It surfaces as a community-wide issue every time there is a dramatic incident between the police and a member of the black community. But it is an everyday issue for members of the African American community. Racial profiling has come to the fore again because of the deaths of Roger Owensby and Jeffrey Irons, who died while being arrested by the police. These incidents, especially the Owensby death, has inflamed many people, resulting in protests and threats of lawsuits and boycotts. Rather than simply throw fuel on the fire that is being stoked at City Council and on talk radio, I wanted to step back a bit to pursue some broader contextual issues. After all, no one supports racial profiling as it is popularly understood. But what are the scope and boundaries of the issue? What are other communities, cities doing to address this issue? And what is being done now in police training programs to combat the problem? To discuss these and other questions, I am joined this morning by Professor Lawrence Travis, who is a member of the Criminal Justice Department at the University of Cincinnati. Larry, welcome to Newsmakers. First off, do police, putting aside racial profiling for a minute, do police use profiling? Sure. And if so, what is it?
Profiling is, in some ways, you can think of it as stereotyping or experience, probably pretty much as the same as all of us do. There are certain circumstances in which your experience and your training tell you to expect certain kinds of behaviors, and so you look for those kinds of circumstances.
Well, you know, there's a TV show called The Profiler or something where supposedly it's even a science. Is that actually
No,
true?
that's a much more highly developed form of profile where you have psychologists trying to understand what motivates an offender, what their kinds of behaviors mean. What people typically think of in terms of racial profiling is an understanding that in this kind of a community, someone who is dressed in this fashion, who behaves in this way, who looks like this kind of a person is more likely to be involved in, say, drug sales or robbery or something along those lines than other folks that are there.
You know, and sometimes, and this is taking the anecdotal evidence, I don't think anybody who has African American friends hasn't heard stories, and I know I have, of people, you know, middle class African Americans who drive a nice car, live in a neighborhood and get stopped in their own neighborhood because supposedly they don't belong there or don't belong in that kind of car. Yeah. And how, that's the anecdotal evidence. What kind of scientific studies have been structured to try to see how significant this type of racial profiling is and how it's used in the community? What kind of studies have been done? There's
a tremendous amount of interest in the whole notion of racial profiling now, but the research isn't back yet because the whole idea of racial profiling is a new sort of buzzword for a long-standing practice by police officers of looking for things that don't fit. Most of us don't look for those things, we don't see them, but I mean, I never look for mud on a front license plate. I never look or think about really somebody wearing a long coat on a warm day. Those are the kinds of things that police officers look for, and it's called sometimes an incongruity procedure. The idea is that something's incongruous, something doesn't fit. And unfortunately in our society, very often, if you have a minority group member in a majority community, that doesn't fit. If you have minority members who generally are poor, don't have good employment opportunities and those sorts of things, and they're driving a fancy, expensive car, that doesn't fit. And it's been a long-standing problem with the police. It's got at least a 40-year history in recent years, and it's a matter of trying to change those, I guess, practices.
When you say that the pardon me, the scientific studies aren't back yet, how could they even be structured? What kind of questions can legitimately be asked? What could we learn about the dynamics of what is seen as racial profiling?
Well, I think probably the best way to do it would be to observe police officers. actually have someone in the car with them and try to get information about who's more likely to get stopped, what are the circumstances under which people are more likely to get stopped. The problem, of course, is you put an observer in the car, or you put a camera in the car, and the officers know that, and you have what we call reactivity. When you know you're being studied, you may change your behavior because you're being studied. And so that complicates the things. We do have some, in fact, quite a bit of literature that has looked at the differences between white and minority group members' perceptions of offense severity, police behavior, satisfaction with the police. We've got some studies that have looked at the impact of race in vignette kinds of exercises, not real life exercises, that have tried to see whether or not the race of the suspect makes a difference for the police. And these studies indicate that, to me at least, what we're talking about here is largely a perceptual problem. It has, unfortunately, real world consequences.
When you say a perceptual problem, let's try to get at that. What is the perception that an African American community is much too broad? Right. Because there's, like in any other subgroup, there's lots of different perceptions. But what can we say about the range of perceptions within the African American community?
Well, at the risk of stereotyping, it seems to me that the African American community in general believes that they are special targets for police intervention based primarily on race. Police, on the other hand, don't see that. They don't act in terms of race. In fact, most police officers that I know would say that race does not enter into their decision making. The problem is that when you get into the reality, the police officers do not believe that they are acting on race. They're acting on other cues. But they disproportionately find themselves in interactions with African American citizens. The citizens, on the other hand, can't really accept the notion that it's not some form of bigotry on the part of the police officers because they or their friends have been stopped so often. And so what happens here is you have folks arguing over the cause of this problem. And it gets really messy because if the cause is police officer bigotry, then the solution is to deal with that bigotry. If the cause is something else structurally in our society, then the solution is to change something else that's in our society. And we can't get the two most involved groups, if you will, the minority community and the police community, to sort of share, to come together and to identify what is the real cause of the problem.
You know, if we, in Cincinnati, where I like to say that diversity comes in two colors and one language here, yes. It breaks down on this race line, right. Black and white. But if we were in another community, if we were in Chicago, in Cleveland, in New York, a more complex, ethnically complex community, right. How would this issue play itself out? How does it play itself out where there are multiple ethnic identities in the community?
For whatever reason, nationally, I think the major problem is between the African American community and the police. But in other communities, you will see similar kinds of difficulties with Asian communities, and especially with Hispanics. You get into the Southwest or out into California, and the Hispanic community tends to have the same sorts of reactions to the police as does the African American community here.
So that, in fact, other groups do experience this. So if we were talking
yes.
about this in Southern California or in South Florida, we might be structuring this discussion a little bit differently.
Yes, yes. But the African Americans that live in those communities would feel the same as the African Americans that live in Cincinnati. It's just we would expand this and there would be other groups involved.
You know, one of the things that's being demanded by the people who are protesting at the moment is that Cincinnati City Council adopt formally a policy of opposition to racial profiling. Have other communities done that, and does it make any difference?
I'm not aware of anybody that's adopted a policy against racial profiling, but I haven't really attended to that issue. What I've seen more is like New Jersey State, the state police, where they say, well, we're not going to do this anymore. It wasn't an affirmative action sense of, we will have a policy against doing racial profiling, but rather from henceforward, thou shalt not racially profile.
And what difference does that make on the ground?
I don't think it makes much difference, to tell you the truth. As I said before, I think it's sort of a cop thing, if you will. You learn over years and years and years of working the streets what kinds of circumstances are likely to involve criminality and what the people involved in criminality may look like. And those are the ones that pique your interest. Those are the ones that get you started. And of course, if you look consistently at African Americans for criminal behavior, you're going to find some. You're not going to find it everywhere, but you won't find it everywhere with anyone. The more you find, the more it goes into the arrest statistics and the databases, and the more it supports the notion that if you're looking for crime, this is the group you look at.
And in fact, with those statistics, are you saying that if the police looked elsewhere, they would find more crime? I mean, is this sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy? It's a circle? We create the statistical base that supports our view?
I think partially, yes. I think it partially is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you were to look simply at teenagers, and teenagers as a group, and we don't treat them as a minority group per se, but youth in general have similar feelings about the police as minority communities, because they do represent a minority and they do get a lot of police attention. If you looked at youth in general, you're going to find them, probably because they're young, involved in a lot of low level, at least, criminal behavior. And in fact, police do watch youth. If you looked at white middle class folk for criminal behavior, my guess is you'd find some of it, but you're not going to find the kind of behavior that the police key on and that most of us in the community key on. We don't typically, when I say we, I'm talking white middle class male like myself, doesn't typically go and commit a robbery or sell drugs. I might buy them, but the police look at supply reduction. They focus on the sellers because the sellers are going to be there. The buyers come in and out. And it's easier really to focus on the sellers. And if the sellers happen to be African American, then that's who's going to get arrested.
In the area of training, police training, what is being done to address this issue? Obviously the police are concerned about this. They take a beating PR-wise every time an incident like this takes place. What's happening with police training practices?
There are attempts being made to deal with these kinds of issues, but I'm not sure that those attempts are going to be particularly successful. I have a colleague at Northeastern University, a fellow named Michael Berger, who talks about police training as Pentecost, where what he's saying is using the training to change long-standing beliefs or views or whatever. And that's really what tends to happen. You end up having a scandal in a community somewhere, and so we decide that we're going to train the officers. We bring all the officers in at 20 or 40 at a time, and we put them through an 8-hour block of cultural diversity training or community relations training or something along those lines. And by and large, the officers see that as a political move to appease the community or city council or something. They don't see its relationship to the job, and that's largely because they examine their own behavior and they say to themselves, I don't do this. I don't need this training.
What about inside the police force itself? There are African American members and white members.
Yes.
What any studies that have been done about what kind of discussion goes on among police of different backgrounds?
Actually, a few things that I've seen indicate that not much discussion goes on between female officers and male officers, between minority group officers and majority group officers. I mean, they talk, but they don't talk about these issues, probably much the same as most of us in our work environments don't talk about these issues. We talk about those issues with our friends outside the work environment, but perhaps the stakes are too high inside the work environment.
So realistically, for a community like Cincinnati that finds itself in the middle of a controversy, what are our real options about changing the dynamic?
Well, I think our real option about changing the dynamic is the same here as it is everywhere else. And I haven't seen anybody who's been willing or able to do it. I think it's going to involve a longer process of a dialogue. I think we need to sensitize the community as much as the police so that there's a better understanding on both sides. There's a sense that we were talking before about having officers talk to each other. There is a sense that there's another racial group in the United States, so that we have black and brown and yellow and red and white and blue. That blue, the police represent a separate kind of ethnic group. And so they have a culture. And we have 30 years of doing cultural sensitivity training with police officers, which frankly does not seem to have worked. We have virtually no time where we've tried to do cultural sensitivity training with the community.
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting observation and thought. Thank you for being here this morning, and maybe as things go on, you can come back in the future and help us again.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. After the break, we will discuss what has become a controversial proposal, the funding of the proposed Regional Cultural Association with public monies. Welcome back. Over 3 years ago, a privately funded organization, the Regional Cultural Planning Commission, the RCPC, formed to study what could be done to enhance the impact of the cultural sector on the regional economy. The RCPC contracted using both private and some public funds with the Bay Consulting Group of San Francisco to conduct a study process. They determined that the existing cultural organizations in the region, the theaters, the museums, the performing arts groups, currently generate $674 million of economic impact. So they support collectively over 5,200 jobs, which helps draw 1.25 million visitors to the area and plays an important role in the lives of over 90% of the area residents, according to the annual Greater Cincinnati survey. Through public meetings, focus groups, surveys, and one-on-one interviews, the Bay Consulting Group discussed with people what should be done to enhance the impact of the cultural sector on the life and economy of the region. Those conclusions were embodied in this report, the Regional Cultural Plan, that was issued in March 1999. A key element of that plan was the formation of a permanent regional body, the Regional Cultural Alliance, or RCA, which was to be funded in part through the support from 8 counties and numerous municipalities within the region. Efforts to find those funds in the interim have been led by Tom Neyer. At this point, Hamilton County Commission is considering the appropriation of $600,000 to get the Regional Cultural Alliance off the ground. That proposal has been questioned by the editorial staffs of both daily newspapers and in recent days frontally attacked by the anti-tax leaders Tom Brinkman and Chris Finney in the name of COAST, Citizens Opposed to Additional Spending and Taxes. I am joined now by Tom Neyer. Mr. Neyer is a member of the Hamilton County Commission. He supported the regional cultural planning process and has headed the committee to develop a viable funding plan for the proposed efforts. Tom, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Good morning, Dan. Glad to be here.
You know, if the cultural sector of our area already generates that kind of impact financially and in terms of 5,200 jobs, 670 million, whatever dollars, why is this organization needed? What's the value added part of creating the Regional Cultural Association?
Well, that great artistic inventory that you talk about, Dan, and it's not just arts, it's all things cultural, exists today because of the investments that have been made over the past decades and centuries by our forebears. What we have today is a great asset that provides not just wonderful cultural opportunities, but very important economic development opportunities for the growth of this entire region. So, you know, what we have is all well and good, but for a small incremental investment, I think we get a significant incremental payback that's based on that great asset that we have today.
Do other communities have similar organizations, or are we sort of either going out on a limb or pioneering, depending on how one looks at it? Do other communities have similar organizations?
Well, the Regional Cultural Planning Committee process reveals, frankly, that not only are we not going out on a limb, we're barely catching up. Most other communities of our size have what's called an Arts Council. Now, this is different from the Fine Arts Fund. Many other communities have a Fine Arts Fund type of organization that raises money, distributes money to arts groups, and that's a wonderful asset that we have in this community. What this is a publicly funded, publicly targeted cultural alliance. It's designed to promote jobs, promote cultural tourism, promote education, and promote greater attendance at the assets that we already have. So it's taking an existing asset, but exponentially increasing its worth to the whole community.
So in terms of what this body would do, and I know that's spelled out in the study,
right.
I don't want to get bogged down in lots of details, but what essentially would it do if it was created, funded, and in operation?
Essentially, there's a lot of different things that are contemplated in this plan. The Regional Cultural Alliance was designed to sort of distill it down into some clear categories of work, and I'll just talk about 3 of them. Education, taking this great artistic asset that we have and using it to help children learn and stabilize their own lives. Cultural tourism, where you bring dollars in from other communities into this community. The Convention and Visitors Bureau does a little bit of that right now, but frankly they have a lot of stuff on their plate and are not specifically charged with this. And then the promotion of integrated marketing and coordinated marketing from the other cultural assets that we have in this community.
Why government funds to do this? Why not just have this organization but allow private dollars to be raised to accomplish these sorts of goals?
That is exactly the pointed question, and I'm delighted to have that discussion. There's a lot of superfluous issues that have been raised, but frankly, the only issue that matters, in my view, is why is this an appropriate use of public funds relative to everything else that's on the agenda. I believe that a small investment in the asset that we have provides immense economic development and job creation opportunities for this community. You know, take Procter & Gamble as an example. They are desperately trying to recruit the hottest young employment prospects right out of school to come to Cincinnati to live. Frankly, Cincinnati is a great place for people to come back once they've stabilized, they've married, they have kids. You know, it's no problem to get people to come to Cincinnati then. What you want to do is you want to get people right out of school when they have the hottest young ideas when they're moving. And that's where Procter & Gamble and dozens of other key employers have difficulty, because Cincinnati isn't viewed as having some of the cultural depth and richness that those of us who live here and love it know we have. We have to market it more. And so it helps attract people, it helps attract jobs, and it helps improve the quality of life, but the economic competitiveness of this entire region.
Now, in the funding process for the study, there were a variety of local governments that chipped in funds to help get that done. Right now, you are urging the Hamilton County Commission to appropriate $600,000. The goal, though, is to have a regional funding base, to get other counties, other municipalities to also fund the next steps. Is it wise for Hamilton County to do this by itself, or where are those other groups? I mean, is this $600,000 just going to be, you know, we all talk about regionalism, we all want it to happen regionally, but is it all going to fall back on Hamilton County again?
Well, I'm not sure where the Regional Cultural Alliance is with other counties. My role has kind of changed at this point. You know, I was chair of the transition team, which was designed to take this big report that had 60 different ideas and put it into place. But when it comes time to funding, I have to put another hat on and critically evaluate that with other options that we have. Our seven other counties in the metropolitan area, I understand, are doing the same thing. I'm not involved in those discussions at this point. I would hope that this is something that could be funded and supported regionally. If it isn't, then that doesn't mean that it shouldn't proceed, but I think that it'll be hampered a little bit because of the regional buy-in and frankly the additional money that these other counties could provide.
What about the timing question here? Now, those people who have paid attention know that you've been in a national search process for a director. Do you need Hamilton County to appropriate this money right now so that you can follow through with that? I mean, have you selected a director?
Well, again, the selection and the recruitment would be made by the Regional Cultural Alliance, not by Tom Neyer or any other public official, as far as I know. But my understanding is that they have identified 2 or 3 key prospects. They started the search process last spring when the funding mechanism was at least notionally identified. In June, they started doing some recruiting, and then the Hamilton County Board of Commissioners passed a resolution in support of the funding, or in support of negotiating a contract without actually executing it. And so that, I think, gave them enough confidence to fly people in and interview them. They have now identified 1, 2, or 3 key prospects, and before extending the offer, they want to make sure that the funds are in place. Obviously, before somebody quits their job and moves their family to the city, they want to make sure they've got some money.
I'm aware of time here, so very much this is necessary in order for them to proceed.
Right.
Secondly, one of the timing issues that has come up, did you save this until after the election, but before the swearing in of Todd Portune, in order to get this on the table?
That is a notion that's been put out there by people who are opposed to the general idea. That's one of those, frankly, superfluous, distracting issues that people who are opposed to it are bringing up. But that's their point of view. That's okay. The answer to your question is no. This is exactly consistent with the originally contemplated timing.
And we only have a few minutes or a few seconds left here. What do you expect to happen, very quickly, what do you expect to happen and when do you expect to happen in terms of a vote on this?
I know this week members of the Regional Cultural Alliance were meeting with the county administration. I expect they will come up with a grant agreement sometime in the next week or two, and then it will come to the board for a vote.
Okay. Tom, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be here,
Trying
Dan.
to clarify some of this.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and women shaping our region for the future. Have a good week.